Welcome to the Greater Montana Foundation Legacy Project, preserving the history of Montana broadcasting and the pioneers of communication whose vision and foresight brought together the people of Montana.
Hello, I'm Norma Ashby, and I'm very glad to be a part of the Greater Montana Foundation Broadcast Legacy Project. Today I'm talking to an old friend, Jerry Black, from Shelby, Montana, and he has spent nearly 50 years of his life in broadcasting at KSCN in Shelby, first as a salesman, then as manager, and finally as co-owner. So today you're going to get to know a lot more about Jerry, his background, and some of his great memories in broadcasting. So Jerry, welcome. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, Norma. Great to be here.
You betcha. Well, let's start at the very beginning and have you tell us where you were born and raised.
I was born in Lewistown, Montana. At 2 years old, we moved to Shelby. My dad opened a restaurant in Shelby, and that began the long career in Shelby, Montana.
Right. And did you have siblings at that point in your life?
I had one sister.
Okay. And then what about your family now? Who are you married to and how many children?
Well, I'm
and
married, excuse me, to Billiette Bolton of Cutbank.
Okay.
And we have 6 children, 11 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren.
That's a big family. Oh my gosh. Okay, now what about your education? Did you graduate from Shelby High School?
Yes, I did, not with honors.
And then did you have any advanced education from
I
there?
went to Montana State in Bozeman, spent 2 years there. Then I got offered a job in Shelby, and I took it. For the summer. It ended up for a long, long summer.
Okay. So your first job really out of college was at KSCN, is that correct?
Well, my first job out of college was with the Shelby Distributors, a beer distributorship. I delivered beer all over northern Montana. And while I was doing that, a fellow came up and said, "How'd you like to work at KSCN, sell advertising?" I said, "Well, why not?"
And you were how old at that time?
Well, I was 22.
20, I thought you were 20.
20.
Okay,
I'm
you're
sorry.
20 years old, you're really young, and started as a salesman. No previous broadcasting experience.
None whatsoever.
Okay. Boy, but 2 years later, you found yourself as manager. How in the world did that happen?
They were desperate. Well, I enjoyed broadcasting immensely. And I did well at sales. And that was the key thing back then.
Sure.
And they needed a manager, so he said, "Do you want to run the station?" Well, I said, "I sure do. If you're willing, I'll try it."
And how many were on your staff at that time?
6.
6 of you.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm sure, like a lot of small stations, everybody did everything.
They did.
Yeah.
From sweeping the floor. You know, when I started back then, they had wire recorders, if you can imagine. And everything was just done live in the studio.
Sure.
And but I enjoyed it. We had some great people, and so I just took off and did the best I could.
Yeah. You know, we talk about embarrassing moments in careers, and I know you've had a few. And and I think you did the news at one time.
I did.
Tell me a few of those embarrassing moments that you had.
Well, probably the most embarrassing was during the flood. And I was out in the mobile unit, and everything was just rushing by, you know. And I'm trying to describe what's going on, and they needed urns of coffee, and I called them urinals of coffee.
And then I understand one time you were talking about a gun, and how did you describe the gun?
Well, it was a 30-06, and I'm doing a SWAT and bulletin board in the morning, and I called it a 30-foot 6-inch gun. And then a fellow had these little lambs for sale, and so I saw he had 15 iwis instead of ewes.
I bet your listeners just loved it.
Oh, they said they never had so many great results on that.
Oh, that's so good. Well, and then in 1976, you and your partners were fortunate to be able to purchase KSCN, so you became co-owner.
Yeah.
And then you went on to develop a what do you call it, a FM station.
Yes.
And those are still on the air,
It is.
KCIN. That's awesome. So what was it like for you to finally be an owner of a property?
Well, it was a long ordeal. And I bought out John Lyon, and he was a very tough negotiator. It took us 2 or 3 years to get it done, but it was well worth it. And it was the culmination of many, many years of working in broadcasting.
Right.
So I was thrilled to be the owner.
Well, you made such an impact on the High Line, and
Thank you.
And you know, and the station's still going strong today.
Yep, it is.
And really meeting the needs of the community. And even today, they talk about all the graduates from the
Yep.
high schools across the area where you
Absolutely.
serve. And was that something you started?
Yes.
And why did you think that was important?
Well, we wanted to be a part of the community. So when the grads came along, we thought we got to recognize them. They're such a huge part of our area.
Yeah.
So we did the salutes to the grads. And it worked out very, very well.
Yeah, and it still does.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but of all the many stories that you covered, I'm sure the Great Flood of 1964 had to be the most incredible of all. Talk about that too.
Well, it was really the greatest event in KSCN's history. And that was our proudest moment. And when the flood hit, fortunately, we had just bought a lot of mobile equipment, and we barely had it hooked up when the flood hit. But that enabled us to do live coverage of the flood. We did everything we could. We sent out mobile units, and the area was cut off from all communication. So they relied on KSCN for their communication, and it was an amazing thing.
Right.
People just called in constantly, thousands of messages, trying to get out word as to how they were, where they were at, and what had happened. So we did that, and after a while, instead of live coverage, I just had to get back to the office because the phones were just ringing there off the hook. And so we coordinated everything back at our main office. And it was a wonderful deal, but tremendously inspiring for us. We went 4 days and 4 nights without sleep, and it was, like I said, our proudest moment.
Right.
And it made KSCN. After that, you know, we were just a local radio station trying to get along, but that moment, that flood, gave us a new image of somebody that we could trust, and we knew they would cover everything that was going on. So it was immeasurable what that meant to KSCN and the success that it brought.
Absolutely. I understand you even left one of your portable units at a gym in Valier where Vita Marsh, who was a
Yes.
longtime friend of mine,
Really?
was your correspondent. And she
Yeah,
was
she
able
was.
to take calls and forward them to you.
Yeah, Valier was cut off, you know, and she just did a marvelous job.
Yeah.
So they started calling her, you know, to get messages out on the air,
Yeah.
and it was wonderful.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's such an interesting story. You need to write about it, Jerry.
Yeah,
You really
right.
do, because your station really saved the High Line, I think,
Yeah,
in
it did.
more ways than one.
That's right.
Even though there were some tragedies and some folks lost their lives.
Well, 32 altogether.
Right. I know you'd like to give credit to Bob Norris, who was right
Bob
there with
Norris was an amazing guy. What a wonderful talent.
you. Yeah, and you two worked together for quite a while, too, didn't
Many,
you?
many years.
Yeah, but we would like to catch up with him too
Yeah.
for these interviews.
Right.
Now, we want to talk to you a little bit about some of the famous people that came through Shelby that you got to meet, because Shelby and Cut Bank both were famous for their farm forums
Yep.
that attracted people from all over the region. So of that, would you like to mention 2 or 3 of the names that you got to meet through that?
Yeah, I'd first like to say Bob Hauser was the chairman of that event,
Okay,
and he did a wonderful job.
okay, of the farm forum.
Yes.
Okay.
And probably our biggest guest was Ronald Reagan.
Now, was that when he was governor or president?
It was when he was governor,
Okay.
running for president.
Okay.
And he packed them in. We had 5,000 in the Cut Bank gym. We had a tremendous snowstorm that day. He got stuck going to the airport, but he was wonderful.
Yeah. And who else?
Norman Vincent Peale. One of our real characters was Billy Carter.
Jimmy's
can
son,
imagine.
brother. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, what did he have to say, and you didn't say much. Is that right?
He couldn't give a speech,
Yeah.
and we had to interview him, and but he was good.
Yeah. Well, good. the stories could go on, but I do charge you to write about this because you have so many good memories. So as a trustee of the Greater Montana Foundation, which is sponsoring all of these various interviews, and of course it was founded by Ed Craney, pioneer
Right.
broadcaster, to add to the excellence of broadcasting. But you've been in this foundation a long time. And so
I have.
what would you like to say about the foundation and
Well,
what it's done?
I would say it's one of the greatest things that I've ever done, and it's so satisfying. We fund so many programs on PBS, and they come make a presentation of what they want to do, and then we award them the money to do it. And it just is a wonderful deal for people and organizations to get their message out, and it's so important. The Greater Montana Foundation is one of my proudest moments because of all the work they do and the funding they give. And I knew Ed Craney before he died.
Oh, you did? Okay.
And so he was an amazing guy. And you either did it his way or no way.
Didn't he found the Z-Bar network, the
Yes,
chain
he
of
did.
radio stations, right?
Yep.
And now, of course, the foundation is reaching out more and more to commercial grants and
Yeah.
making it possible to show excellent programs on commercial television,
Yeah.
which is really great. Yeah,
Right.
You bet. And you are retiring this year from
Yep, I'm
your
retiring.
many years of service on that
Yeah.
foundation.
Time to move on.
Yes. And speaking of moving on, after you retired from broadcasting, you moved on into politics.
I did.
And so that enters it into a whole nother phase of your life.
Yep.
And many years did you serve, and which branch did you serve
Well,
in?
I served in the Senate for 8 years, and that's all you can serve.
Okay.
So I either had to run for the House or retire. Well, to run for the House, that was like the difference between going to a country club and I just couldn't do it.
Okay. So do you remember your slogan and what did you run on?
Straight talk.
Straight talk. Well, you know about that as a
Yep.
broadcaster. So was there a piece of legislation that you were responsible for that you're particularly
Well,
pleased
many.
with? Okay.
And one of the best ones, I think, was the wind farms. And that legislation enabled all the wind farms to be built in northern Montana.
Right.
So that was a real major piece of legislation that I was most proud of. And others was some not so proud of, like the ethanol bill. But that was a tough bill, and it was what Conrad wanted. So I passed that. Took 2 years to do it, but we did it. And but nothing ever developed from it.
Right, I should say.
Yeah.
So would you say, as a broadcaster, to be able to work with both sides of the aisle, to be able to compromise was an invaluable lesson that you brought
Absolutely.
to your Senate job?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You had to take both views, and you had to be very fair and straightforward about what you were going to do and wanted to do. But, today they don't do that. They don't get along, and it causes a lot of deadlock
Yeah.
and a lot of problems. But back then, we tried to do it. We tried to work together. Some of my best friends were from the other side of the party, and that was great.
Yeah.
So I made lifetime friends in the Senate, and it was wonderful. It was the hardest thing I ever did, the most challenging thing. You worked early morning to late at night every day.
So who are some of your good friends from your years in the Senate?
Some of my good friends, well, I had many, but at the time, one of the fellows that I worked with a lot was Jeff Essman. Senator Essman became president of the Senate, and we later on didn't get along as well, but at the time we did very well.
Right.
So he was instrumental. Also, another good one was, he's just now filed for the Senate, and he's from Big Fork and owned the Big Fork Inn.
So I'd love to hear your advice, first of all, of being in politics to anybody that might think about it, because if we don't have good people sign up to run, we won't have our system. So do you have any advice for that? And then we'll talk back to broadcasting and advice.
Well, my advice for the Senate or running for office?
Yes, right.
Well, that is a huge commitment.
Yeah.
You better be ready to work your fanny off. But it's different now today. They have what they call dark money. that affects elections, and but it's a tremendous experience, humbling and challenging, educational. It's the best thing I ever did.
So you feel very proud of your years.
I do.
And what year, when were you in it? What was
Well,
your-
I was in it in '02 to '08.
Okay, well, that was a very productive time for you.
Yeah,
I know.
2010.
And to 2010, okay. Let's just go back to broadcasting for a minute, and advice you'd have to give to a young person considering going into broadcasting. What would you have to say to them?
Well, it depends which field they're going to go into, sales or programming or news or what. But the main thing is they got to be ready to serve the community. That's number one. And the more local your station is, the better it is. And local news is essential. So, and they got to be prepared to work hard, long hours, do anything that's necessary at the station, from mopping the floors to doing interviews like this. And it's a great experience.
Speaking of interviews, you did interviews along with everything else, from mopping the floors to everything else.
Yep.
Did you ever get into an interview that really stumped you? I mean, I did one time with Benny Reynolds, for example, the great rodeo star.
Yeah.
And all he would say is yup and nope. And that was his word. I mean, he just did.
Yeah.
So did you ever run into some challenging interviews that
Well,
you
many
did?
of them. You bet.
Do you
And you just had to pry it out of them. Ask good questions.
Yeah, right. And try to ask open-ended questions that can't be answered by
That's
yes
right.
and no.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have any in particular that were fun for you to remember and glad you could do it?
Well, probably Ronald Reagan was one of the best.
He was a natural, wasn't he?
He was awesome.
They called him the great communicator, didn't they?
And he was that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, his movie background didn't hurt
Oh.
at all.
an amazing man.
Yeah, he was. He's still beloved by many people
Yeah,
to
he
this
is.
day. Yeah, he came to Great Falls, and
Yeah.
I had a chance to meet him with Governor Babcock at a Rainbow Hotel reception here
Oh,
one
sure.
time. Yeah, that was fun. Yeah,
I'll bet.
sure. So, what else should we talk about as far as your broadcasting career? Because you've had such a broad and
Well,
wide one.
Today, broadcasting is totally different than it was back then. Today, it's all digital, and everything is automated. And back then, when we were going strong, there was no such thing as digital and all of that. So, but the main thing is back then is to be local. The more local your station is, the better it is. And we covered everything that we could. If it moved, we covered it.
And live in most cases.
Yeah, most cases live.
You keep talking about the importance of involvement, and you certainly had deep involvement in Shelby and your whole region.
Yep.
Talk about some of your aspects of that. I mean, some of the groups you were in and why you enjoyed being in them.
Well, nothing is more satisfying than to do something that all the people want to know about and hear about.
Yeah.
And so that's why we did it. And if everybody became involved, we had 5 mobile units. The salesmen all drove a mobile unit. When they were out selling, we said, if there's a story, drop everything and cover it. So that's what we did.
Yeah. But you were in local organizations too,
Oh, absolutely.
like clubs, and what were some of those that you were involved in?
Well, the Chamber of Commerce,
Right.
naturally. The Kiwanis Club. Those are the 2 main ones.
Yeah, and your station, KSEN, got a national award for public service, if I'm not mistaken. Tell us more about that.
Well, that was due to the flood.
Okay,
And that was a Sigma Delta Chi Award, which is the highest public service award you can win. So we won that for the coverage of the flood. Also the National Headliners Club Award. And those were the 2 main ones. Then we won the Crystal Award, which is Broadcasting's award for public service. That was given at the National Convention in New Orleans. And that was a wonderful deal.
yeah,
So we were very, very proud of those events.
absolutely. And what about you personally? You've gotten a few awards in broadcasting too, haven't you?
Well, Not that I can think of.
Well, you should if you haven't,
Yeah.
that's for sure. Yeah. So now we should talk about what you're doing now, because you retired from broadcasting, you retired from politics, you're retiring this year from the Greater Montana Foundation. So now where do you live and what are you doing now?
Well, I live in Sun City West. I do anything I want. But, you know, during the last election, I still was involved. I cut commercials for some of the local candidates, and I enjoyed that. So I'm not totally out of it.
That's good.
Yeah.
So do you have advice to give for people to have a happy retirement? That's another huge.
Have a lot of money.
Have a lot. Okay, have a lot of money. That's funny, but you and your wife are a wonderful team. 53 years. You've been,
Yeah, 54.
54 years you've been married, and that's amazing. So
Yeah.
what about your secret for a long and happy marriage?
Marry the right gal.
The right one. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's precious. You know, the advice that Walter Bruning gave me for having a long and happy life, you know what he told me?
What?
He lived to be 114, you know. You remember Walter
Oh, yeah,
Bruning?
I remember.
And he said, be kind to each other because we're not kind.
Yeah.
And number 2, mind your own business.
Yeah, oh really?
That's something, yeah.
I've never been able to do that.
You know, that's true. As a broadcaster, you couldn't.
Yeah, right.
So of the broadcasters on the air today, do you follow them? Do you watch the news?
I watch the news.
Okay,
I watch KRTV occasionally
good.
when I can, and I read the Great Falls Tribune. And that's about it. I listen to KSCN
Sure. And
on the internet.
yeah. So do you have local or national broadcasters that you admire or have admired through the years that you think have done a great job, maybe living or dead, that you could mention? How about Chet Huntley and, you know,
Oh,
Huntley?
absolutely.
Probably,
Chet Utley was great.
yeah, he was our Montana guy from Cardwell, Montana. Yeah,
So was Ed Graney.
yeah, right.
Yeah, and what other ones? Let's see. Chet Utley.
Well, there's Tom Brokaw and there's
Yeah.
people like that. I didn't
Right.
know, if, you know, the guys on 60 Minutes. Do you
Yeah.
watch some of them? Yeah, you know who I really liked when he was living was Charles Kuralt.
Oh, absolutely.
He was one of my very favorites.
In fact, he had a connection to Montana.
Yes, he did. He had a place down at Twin Bridges.
Yep.
Came and he's been at some of the broadcasters conventions.
Yeah, I remember.
That's where I met him, and I learned that he was a great fly fisherman. And so I sent him some of my late husband's flies.
Really?
And he was so excited. He says, I'm not going to use them. I'm going to put them in a little shadow box and hang them on my office wall.
Wow.
Isn't that something? But he was great. You know,
He
his
was.
on-the-road reports were
Yeah,
terrific.
unreal.
Unreal. And one of my favorites was when he interviewed Ira Perkins at Bynum, the longest tenured principal
Yeah.
in the nation.
Yeah.
And he put that on his On the Road series
Yeah,
on
I recall.
CBS. Yeah. So Montana has been the object of a lot of stories. But as you said earlier, no story bigger than the Great Flood of '64.
Yeah.
Because that did capture people's
Right.
imagination all over the country. Yeah. So, what are some of the hobbies that you have now to keep you occupied besides politics and
Well, that's the main one. And that's really the big one. Politics.
Yeah.
I still have an interest and follow it. And it's so critical, you know,
Yeah.
to have good candidates. And I don't like what I see going on the national and the local level in Montana. They bicker and fight. They don't get along. Causes gridlock in the Senate. And they've got to quit that. The dark money, as it's called, influences a lot of elections. And somehow we've got to get rid of that.
Are you using your influence to try to drum up some good candidates for this year?
Well, occasionally.
Any pressure to bear on the major parties to do well in selecting their candidates for the main offices?
Not too much. Mainly it's local.
Did you ever go to a national convention?
Yes, I
You
went
did.
to the National Republican Convention in Minnesota.
And who was running then?
Well, that was when the gal from Alaska,
Okay,
Palin,
Palin.
and that was very enjoyable. Exciting time.
Yeah.
Loved every minute of it. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, do you keep in touch with Tim Babcock at all, Governor Babcock?
Well, I did when I was in the Senate, And Tim Babcock, a great guy.
Yeah, he's 94 now.
I know it, and I love the guy.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's outlived all of us.
he's outlived a lot of people, I know,
Yeah.
but he's still.
And his wife was particularly a great woman.
Yeah, she was. Do you have any comment to make about the fact this is the 100th year of women's suffrage, women's opportunity to vote for the first time? We were way
Well,
ahead in Montana, you know,
Yeah,
6
women
years.
have just played a major role.
Yeah,
And thank goodness.
yeah,
They've done a wonderful job. And we've got to keep pushing that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to find good candidates.
yeah. A lot of women have so many other jobs.
Yeah, they
you know,
do.
taking care of
Yeah.
home and family and all.
Right.
But I think you're seeing more and more women's coming
We need more
forward.
women like you, Norma.
Oh, well, I don't know about that. I had an opportunity to run years ago, and I just said, you know, I feel like I get more done just being a citizen than a candidate.
really.
So I stayed, but you know, who could have known? It would have been
Yeah,
fun.
that's right.
I admire you for have gone
Thank you.
ahead and gone into politics, because your campaign theme was talk first, what was it?
Talk straight.
Talk straight. I just love that. I'm going to pass that on to a
Yeah.
candidate if I have a chance sometime. Yeah.
Straight talk.
Straight talk. I think it's the best. So we're getting close to the end, but are there any other areas? You're so glib, Jerry. I mean, you can talk about anything, because you said you had a morning show at
Yeah.
one time, and you had to talk about a lot of different things, and I think that's great.
That morning news program was more fun. And it was called Viewing Montana, but affectionately all the people in our area called it Chewing Montana.
Did you get to talk to newsmakers?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and they could say anything? I mean,
Yeah.
but you didn't have problems with them swearing on the air or anything like that,
Not
did
really,
you?
no.
No. And
They're very careful about that.
yeah, more so than
They
today.
swore afterwards.
That's priceless. And how long was the show?
15 minutes,
So
but it
I-
always ran 25.
And you could get away with it because you
Yeah,
were on, you know,
right.
you were part of the team that needed to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think that you really hit it on the head, that the local angle in local
Absolutely.
stations is what's most
And
important.
you know, today, so many stations, there's like a jukebox. And they don't cover the local news like they used to. We'd drop everything and get into mobile units and go out and do it live. From car wrecks to fires, didn't matter what it was, we were there.
Yeah. Did you have much crime in Shelby when you had the station?
Well, not really, no.
No, because I know when I moved away into a big city, I would read all this crime, and I said, we don't have crime like that in Montana.
Well, that's the way it is in Arizona.
Yeah,
I mean, it's so big, there are couple of
Yeah,
million people,
right.
and the crime is unbelievable.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I know you're glad to be away from there right now, because how high is the temperature right now?
Well, it's probably about 105. It's
So,
that way every day,
and you probably stay inside a lot.
a lot.
You can't go out and play golf or anything
No.
with that kind of
That's right.
temperature. Well, Jerry Black, it's been a real joy to visit
Oh,
with
it's
you.
been a pleasure, Norma.
Yes, and
You are wonderful at interviewing.
well,
and
thank you.
the way you relate to people is amazing.
Well, ditto. You're the same way. Well, it's been a joy, and we've been talking to Jerry Black, and I'd like to close with this comment made by a colleague who said, Jerry Black epitomizes everything that is real and wholesome about being a broadcaster in Montana in the
Wow.
final half of the 20th century.
Yeah, really.
Isn't that great?
Who said that?
I'm not going to tell you. It was a colleague.
We'll get even with him.
So we want to thank Jerry Black for all that you have done and for the Greater Montana Foundation Broadcast Legacy Project. I'm Norma Ashby. Thanks for viewing.
This programming series is brought to you by the Greater Montana Foundation, benefiting the people of Montana through communication of issues, trends, and values of importance for present and future generations of Montanans. And by the Montana Historical Society, Big Sky, Big Land, Big History. And with the help of Cordillera Communications, with stations in Billings, Bozeman, Butte, Great Falls, Missoula, Kalispell, and Helena. Cordillera Communications, the Montana Television Network.